Welcome to Bookin' It. Today's episode will be the Stormlight Archive, books 1 through 3. Hey everyone, welcome back to Bookin' It. I'm of course your eloquent host, Cooper Cobbs, and today I'm going to be kind of doing just a shortish solo episode on the first 3 books of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. So, for those of you who maybe don't know, Brandon Sanderson is one of the biggest fantasy writers publishing today, and the 5th book, which is kind of the conclusion of the first part of the series, the Stormlight Archive, is coming out in about just a few days, I guess now. And so I thought that as I've been reading through other books in the series coming up to the release of the new book, that I just do a review of those 3 books because we haven't done one so far. We have done in the past an episode just talking about Brandon Sanderson more generally, and I think that definitely a lot of what I brought to that discussion came from my thoughts on the Stormlight Archive. But I thought this would be a good time to do an episode on that series more specifically. So right now, I just finished the 3rd book, Oathbringer, on the way home from Thanksgiving break, and I am a little bit through Rhythm of War, which is the 4th book, and then hopefully by the end of at least the school semester here at college, that I'll be able to start the 5th and final book, and then I'll probably do a review of that book as well as perhaps the 4th book, Rhythm of War, too. Anyway, I meant to do this episode a long time ago. Just couldn't make time for it, unfortunately. And then I got to finish Oathbringer, so on the way home from Thanksgiving break. So it worked out that I was able to do it now anyway and get 3 books in instead of just 1 or 2. So anyway, let's get started. So first I'm going to do a kind of non-spoiler review of the Stormlight Archive, and then we can move into some spoilers later on for each of the books. I'll give kind of my thoughts on the series as a whole, give my thoughts on individual books, and say why I think that personally I like Oathbringer, the 3rd book, the best. So okay, non-spoilers. Here we go. So the Stormlight Archive is, where to start? It's really good at world building. Like, I guess that's kind of a given. But it is a very well thought out world in terms of if you like the hard magic kind of thing where you can tell all the rules, you know what's going on. It's almost like a kind of science book at some points where you can kind of discover what's going on in the world. And that's a really fun part of reading a Sanderson book is discovering the magic system, discovering what the magic, how the magic works in the series, in the book. And you can kind of follow along with the characters as they start to figure it out for themselves as well. Because in Stormlight Archive, the series begins after this kind of... they're still discovering things. There have been things that have been lost, and part of the series, I'll try to be vague for non-spoilers, involves getting those things back, powers, basically, to kind of fight enemies. So that's always fun when you read a Sanderson book, and that is definitely the case when it comes to the Stormlight Archive. I was really interested, actually, to see, when I came back to the series, my second read-through this time, because it's been just 2 years, I guess, since I read the first series. And actually, I should probably do baggage in a minute. I'll get to that in a second. I was interested to see if, because a lot of it involves kind of this reveal of the mystery of the plot in the first book, the kind of arrival of these new and old powers, that I was going to be bored because the first book didn't involve those things. And definitely I feel like I really enjoy the books later in the series where those things are kind of fully developed and we can kind of make use of them. You know, it's like that scene in any superhero movie where they have full control of their powers and they can now kick the bad guy's butt really hard, and it's awesome. I think that is a lot of fun in the Stormlight Archive, especially. But I don't think that the earlier books in the series suffer as much as I feared from not being that fun to read or that appealing because of their lack of sophistication or advancement when it comes to these powers or mysteries or new magic, that kind of thing. Okay, so that said, world building is good, magic system, getting to discover that is all fun. Let me now take a step back and I'll just do some history with the series. So I guess I think I talked about this. Maybe you can probably listen to the other Brandon Sanderson episode that we did a couple years ago about this. But I guess I found out through him because I was doing research for a speech that I was writing on the history of the fantasy novel, which was a lot of fun. Didn't do very well because that's not a great speech idea, but it was a lot of fun research. And anyway, I kind of found out about him through that, and I kind of realized that all my friends in the speech and debate community really liked him, or a lot of them did at least. And so I kind of discovered that, he's this big guy. A lot of people like him. That's cool. So I think that next I realized that our close friends, who we'd known for a very long time, were huge fans of Sanderson. Their dad is a huge aficionado, has a big collection of his books. It's great. And so they were kind of the next person to kind of get me on this. Maybe I should read the books. Maybe I should dive in. And I thought to myself, I think that a lot of people recommend if you're reading Sanderson, you start with Mistborn, which is kind of a more accessible, it's still pretty long, more accessible, ride when it comes to diving into his books. But it's sold a lot of copies. It's kind of what made him launched his career and got him the job writing Wheel of Time, finishing up that series. But I realized that I just wanted to start with the Stormlight Archive because that's the big series. That's what everybody says is the best. It's diving off into the deep end, but hey, I can do that. I'm a sophisticated reader, of course, as I thought to myself when I pushed up my glasses and looked at our podcast. But I started reading The Way of Kings, which is the first book in that series, and I found it to be slow. I found the writing to not be that great, and it took me a very long time. This is the only time I think that I have try to read a Stormlight Archive book, paper copy. All the rest I have listened to them on audiobook. So I read the first book, and it just didn't keep my interest very long. It got very good at the end. I think I got a lot better, and so I enjoyed the ending. And obviously, I think the things I said earlier still stand. I think I would have said those back then too, but I found it slow, and I found the writing to be not great. Fast forward to the summer, I'm mowing the lawn. And I think to myself, I need an audiobook to listen to keep me company while I'm mowing the lawn. And so I'm like, I'll give Brandon Sanderson another chance. So I start the second book in the series, Words of Radiance. And from then on, I'm hooked. I mean, the books, I thought there was a huge jump in quality. And we'll get to this later, but I don't think that actually, I think The Way of Kings was better than I gave it credit for, perhaps back then. But I start listening to Words of Radiance, and I think the writing is much better. I find the characters more compelling. I find the story more compelling. I find the growth in powers and mysteries to be ever expounding and wonderful. And then after that is done, later in the summer and early fall, I start Oathbringer. I finish Oathbringer in like October, and immediately afterwards I start Rhythm of War, and finish that by December. So kind of just took off running basically after that. And now here we are a couple years later, rereading the books. So all I have to say, first time around, I didn't think Way of Kings was that great. But this time around, I did listen to it this time instead of reading it. And I apologize. I wish I could read some passages, perhaps to kind of talk about it, because I have a copy of it back home. But I had to bring that copy back to college after Thanksgiving break. But I will say, I do think, and this maybe gets to my big overall critique, is I think Stormlight Archive is a ton of fun. And I think it's really great, and I think that any fantasy fan, especially if you want to stay up to date of like what are people reading today when it comes to fantasy, I think that it's a fun series. It's a good series, but number one, it's an investment. It is going to be 5 soon massive books of almost 400,000 words apiece. I think the only book that is not 400,000 words is The Way of Kings, and all of the other ones are over or well over that total. So it is close to, I guess it's going to be close to 2 million words, probably, by the time this book comes out, which is insane. It's a lot of words. Even when you're listening to it on 3.5 times speed on Audible like I am to try and get these done in time for the new book. But I think that I would not just hand this book to somebody and say, the series for that matter, and say, this is good and you need to read it. And I think that was what we talked about a lot with our Brandon Sanderson episode as a whole, which is I would hand Lord of the Rings to someone and say, I don't care what your tastes are in genre. I don't care what your tastes are if you like fantasy. I think that this book will make you a better person. And admittedly, it is one book. I mean, the Lord of the Rings, I mean, if you take it as one book, and, that book is about 500-something thousand words, which is maybe like 1.3 of the Stormlight Archive books. So I think that you can get from Lord of the Rings a massive amount of benefit for a little bit of the investment that you get from Stormlight Archive. And I think that no matter who you are, it'll make you a better person. I think that it transcends the genre. I think that it's just a good literature. And I'm not sure I would entirely say that about the Stormlight Archive. I think that it is a fun read, but at the same time, there's a reason I'm listening to it on 3.5 times speed on Audible and not, savoring every word like I am the Augustine's Confessions, which I'm reading right now and just reading. So at the same time, while it is a fun world building, I think it's got some fun characters. I think it's got some great character development. I think it got some wonderful, stand up and cheer moments. It's a ton of fun. I'd recommend it for people who, if you think you would like it, I think you would like it. And I recommend you getting through the first book. I mean, a lot of people like the first book more than I did the first time around, and I like the book more than I liked the book the first time around, the second time around. So I'd recommend just making your way through the series. I think that it'll be really rewarding for you in terms of a fun read to have, and perhaps you'll take something away. That's good. But at the same time, I don't think I could just hand this to somebody and say, this is a good book. You should read it. You ought to. You will learn from it, like I could from Lord of the Rings. And this is not just to compare everybody to Tolkien and say Tolkien's better. I mean, that's kind of unfair in many ways. But at the same time, there are only so many books you can read. And if your goal of reading, if you don't have time for 2 million words of just fun, and you'd rather read some stuff that is going to make you a better person, that be maybe more informative on the nonfiction side, I don't think Stormlight Archive is for you. I wouldn't say it's a necessary read. Maybe Sanderson would say that too. I don't know. But that's just kind of my critique, is I think that it is great as it is, and I think that it could be better. And I think that that it's just lacking in the number one. I think the writing is passable. I think that it's a lot better in the first book than I gave it credit for the first time around. But I still think that it is not the best prose. And part of this is just I like Lord of the Rings, the way he writes in terms of I feel like I'm in an epic. I feel like these characters are speaking like these characters who are really can pull out of their back pocket an epic line, like Gandalf has dozens of these zingers, and even Aragorn and Frodo say some wonderful things. And in Sanderson, they talk like they're I mean they're joking, they're making that's not to say like you can't make jokes. I think Lord of the Rings has some jokes and is funny too. What I mean to say is that they talk like they're not in epics, and that maybe is a good thing. Maybe it's more relatable to people. I think it certainly makes them more human, and it's just a choice. It's a choice you have to make, but it's not as elevated. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. It's not as elevated in craft when it comes to the Lord of the Rings, and that is a choice. I think he's talked about this before. He wants to make his prose more accessible, and Lord knows Tolkien's prose isn't that accessible. Even though I think that I don't care about that. I think you should still make it through anyway. So I understand why people appreciate that about Sanderson, appreciate his prose, but at the same time, it's not that elevated in style. It's not, and I wouldn't even say elevated. I would just say, I think that when it comes to just writing, I think that he's just an okay writer. I think that he is great at a lot of other things, and I think that the actual craft of prose, he's not that stellar at. So yeah, that's my kind of non-spoiler thoughts on the Stormlight Archive. I think that if you think you'd enjoy it, go for it. I think that if you have more time on your hands, for a fun read, go for it. I think that if you are looking for a book that will make you a better person, you don't have that much time to read a lot of other stuff, probably don't read Stormlight Archive. It's a lot. It's a big investment, and I'm not sure it's like, peak literature. I'm not even sure if it's like second tier peak literature either. But it's a fun fantasy read. I don't think that it's going to harm your soul at all. So that's kind of my non-spoiler review of the Stormlight Archive. And we'll get to some spoilers now. So it's now about 10 hours later in the day, and I'm finishing up this recording, so I apologize if it sounds different or if my energy is different, but let's get to some spoiler review for the Stormlight Archive. So, The Way of Kings, let's start there at the beginning. Personally, I think that like I said earlier, really enjoyed this one comparatively to the last time that I read it, and I think that, I don't know if it was the audiobook this time around, but I found his writing to be more passable than I did, even though I think my critique stands. I don't think he's an excellent writer per se, but I think also I really enjoyed Kaladin's story. I think I enjoyed it last time, but it really hit me this time too. It's got a lot of moments, like I said, that make you just kind of want to stand up and cheer. It's a real underdog story. The Bridge 4 storyline is compelling, and I think Sanderson's focus on mental health actually really works for Kaladin here. I think that it's not. I think that it's very reflective of the modern era, I guess, in terms of him focusing more on a pressing cultural issue like mental health and a cultural struggle, I'll freely admit, rather than someone like Tolkien who might perhaps think about the great conversation and heroic ideals or whatever, That's a choice. That's fine. I think that it definitely prevents it from perhaps being in the conversation for, a fantasy series that's going to last many generations. I think that it's going to restrict it to kind of the modern era and then whatever eras are going to follow after this. But I think that it works in terms of just telling a good story about a man who is in the depths and finds a cause that brings him out of it. I think that the Kaladin story is compelling. It's the main thrust of The Way of Kings. That's what really drives it. Personally, though, I do think that Shallan's storyline, the second kind of secondary character, second main character, I don't find it very compelling in The Way of Kings. I find the earlier chapters with her slow. I don't think that she is funny at first. I think he's kind of figuring out how to write her. I find Wit funny kind of from the get-go here. Although, what's funny is I always found Shallan, her like witty dialogue, quote unquote, in the beginning of the book to be not funny. I still find it not funny. I remember last time really enjoying Wit though, and this time around, I think that I liked Wit's humor a little less too at first. He gets a lot better. I think both these characters, both Wit and Shallan, get a ton better, and that he starts figuring out how to get their dialogue down. But all to say, I don't find Shallan very compelling in terms of her humor. Excuse me. Additionally, I don't comprehend her plan. I understand Sanderson has this, beautiful plot behind Shallan's backstory, which we'll get to in the next book. Plot reasons for why she has to meet up with Yasna, and Yasna, she just really wants them to meet so they can, drive the plot forward. They have to meet. Everything else makes sense. How do we get Shallan from point A to point B with all this background being necessary? And I don't think that her plan were if you could compile a list of people in the world of Roshar to not steal from, Yasna Kholin would be at the top of the list. And she's like, we're going to steal from her. That's the person. What scenario is that? In what world is that a good idea? She has the most resources of any woman on Earth, or on Roshar, I guess I should say. She has the determination of 20 women. She has the tenacity and ferociousness of, I'll just say, why? Why would she want to steal from anyway? And I can forgive Sanderson. And he, so many times I think it's very meta of him. The characters will point out that Shallan's plan was dumb. I think that's the best way you can do it. Everything else works, but this one point, just do the best you can at it. But it still bothers me quite a bit. Okay, and the only other thing I have on Way of Kings that I find less compelling is that I think that the climax. This is very picky, but the climax is less giant. And this will be a critique that I probably will make of the fourth book, Rhythm of War, if I get around to reviewing that. It's Sanderson is very famous for the big conclusion climax of his book, where everything just comes to a point. There's a big battle, and character decisions are made, and growth occurs. In the Way of Kings, the payoff is there. It's very small. It's just like one big battle, and it's only slightly bigger than we've experienced before. And there are some very good moments with Kaladin in Bridge 4 and some stand-up and cheer moments, but I find it very lackluster, especially compared to the rest of the series. So maybe this is a critique relative to like Words of Radiance and Oathbringer rather than necessarily a big critique, because I think the climax works fine on its own. So Way of Kings, decent, it's very long. I think that the prose is probably the worst in this book. I find it to be, at least the last time I read it, and thus far, I find it to be my least favorite. Although it's a fine introduction to the world, it is compelling, even if I find it slow. So there's that. Okay, Words of Radiance. A lot of people think that Words of Radiance is the best book. I think that's not true. I think Oathbringer is better. I'll get to those reasons in a minute. But I think that Shallan. And the reason is that I find Dalinar's backstory more compelling character-wise than Shallan's. But I think Sanderson's figured out how to write Shallan. I think that her flashbacks are very compelling plot-wise. I think that the way he writes them, especially in the beginning, this mystery that slowly unfolds with Shallan and Pattern and her mom, I think that's very, very good, and I really enjoyed that storyline. Dalinar continues to be very likable here. I really enjoy watching him. I think that he definitely becomes more of a real character in this book. Everything just, and this is what I noticed the first time I read the series, and I think that it remains true. Everything just kind of pops more in Words of Radiance. The action pops more, the plot pops more, the characters find their groove. And so everything just kind of starts clicking in Words of Radiance. And so I think that really happens, especially for Dalinar. Kaladin, I think that of the side characters, his storyline is my favorite. I think that I enjoy him. I enjoy him kind of becoming buddies with Adolin. The storyline with him and Elhokar, and realizing that he needs to defend Elhokar because it's the right thing to do, and not because he is particularly inclined towards admiring him. Swearing the higher ideal, I think it's the third ideal at this point, and almost killing Syl, and his reunion with her, all that stuff is really excellent. The climax, the revelations at the very end, all of it, Estella, the Everstorm, Urithiru, the Ghostbloods, everything here just pops. It's very dynamic. The climax with Kaladin and what's his face, the assassin in white in the sky is one of the best, I think, fight scenes so far in the series. And so Words of Radiance, stellar. Oathbringer. Why do I think Oathbringer is better? Okay, I find Dalinar's story to be the most emotionally resonant of all of them. I find his character arc to be the best integrated with the climax. So at the moment where everything's going strong and he has to make a pivotal decision, I love his conversation with the villain Odium. I love how he won't let Odium have his pain, how even when he saw, he actually ended up seeing Cultivation, the Shard incarnate, and realizing that her kind of revealing his memories before Odium's confrontation is actually a good thing, so he can deal with his pain. And so I really love Dalinar taking accountability, the story with the bloodlust and how that is actually an unmade. And I really like how Sanderson kind of walks this line of it being this external force which kind of feeds this bloodlust and desire for blood and war. But at the same time, the whole main thing is Dalinar accepting accountability, which I think is probably the most masculine thing that could be done. So props to Dalinar, props to Sanderson for writing him. I think that also, in terms of Oathbringer being better than Words of Radiance, he has better set pieces. I think it's off to a slower start, and some parts might be a little clunkier, but I think the highs are much higher than Words of Radiance in terms of the Kholinar storyline, the Shadesmar aftermath of that. The Battle of Thaylen City, I think, is a better climax. The reveals when it comes to, actually, this is a big spoiler, the Radiance, the Recreants happen. The Radiants kill their Spren, left their Spren because humans are actually from another world, and the singers, the listeners, the Parshendi, they're all from this world originally, Roshar, and they're not the Voidbringers. The humans are the Voidbringers. And Taravangian obviously comes into his own in Oathbringer. We see a little bit of him in Words of Radiance. We have the big reveal at the end of Way of Kings, obviously, but seeing him kind of interact with his people, the diagram, all of it is great. And I find other stories as well to be pretty compelling in this book. So I think that Oathbringer kind of wins out because it is this peak. One major critique I have for Oathbringer, though, is, and I recognized this my first go-around, and I was interested to see if it was assuaged my second time. It was not. It was the idea that, first book, Dalinar is respected. We do see him in the prologue, conked out. He's drunk, he's not available. And we find that to be a lapse of his character. He then institutes the codes, follows them strictly, reads the Way of Kings. So the context of the first book is very much Dalinar is this noble guy, this warrior who is respected, he's refined, he's diplomatic, although he hates being a diplomat. But we realize in Oathbringer that really, for his entire military career, his entire political career, his entire adult life, really, he has been a force to behold on the battlefield, a force to behold in Rosharan politics, but not been that great of a guy, not been there for his sons. In Rage, he accidentally killed his wife, and we find all these things. And so it seems weird to me that within just a few years of having those memories wiped, becoming a better man, adhering to the war codes, he is suddenly this universally respected. And it seems like the nature of the respect that he's given in the Way of Kings is contrary to the story told in Oathbringer. And I like the story in Oathbringer. I really do like that. And I'm glad that it's there, and I'm glad that he overcomes it. But it seems to contradict this idea of admiration that people have for him earlier in the series. So maybe there's an answer. Maybe some aficionado can tell me why I'm wrong about this. And I'd love to hear it, because that is a critique that I wish did not exist. But I think it's true. I don't understand how that happens. But anyway, okay, is that all I have? I think that might be all I have. So, yeah, I think that Stormlight Archive, like I said earlier, great series. Recommend it. It's a fun time. The characters are great. The development is great. It's very planned out, plotted, and directional. And Sanderson is writing these. He's being transparent. I think one of the things we talked about in our Brandon Sanderson episode was that he keeps writing consistently and publishing consistently, and a lot of other fantasy authors today don't do that. That's why he's very popular. And the Cosmere, obviously, his kind of meta universe, I don't know how to describe it, connected universe of most of his stories, at least. The Cosmere cinematic universe, so to speak, is all very compelling too. I've used the word compelling a lot. But, okay, it's 9 o'clock, it's late. I'd be happy to follow up on this, and I'll be doing another one when the new book I finish, or I finish the new book, if I'm not being poetic and switching around my words. But I'll get around to that, and if you guys have any comments, feel free to send them, and I can talk about them if you'd like me to. Okay, they wanted to hear things more about just kind of upcoming things. So this is our 149th episode when I release this. That is awesome. It means our 150th is coming up soon. So we're hoping to do a special episode with all the original podcast guys. So Matthew is coming, Tanner is coming, Bryson's going to be on, I'm going to be on. We're trying to get Isaiah back on as well to do the podcast, which would be a ton of fun. So all the original guys plus Bryson will be doing a Christmas episode perhaps. We've talked about releasing it on Christmas. It'll be a special celebration of 150 episodes, which is amazing. Thank you guys so much for making all of that possible. So hopefully that's coming out soon. Matthew and I still have a conversation to get around to on Christianese, which just hasn't happened so far this semester. We've been pretty busy. I have a podcast I'm going to do with the college friend. There are things we're going to get around to, and I'm really excited to do those things. So sorry it's been a quiet month or so, but hopefully early next semester we can get cranking out some more episodes. Okay. Well, thank you to our patrons who support us over at patreon.com/bookinet. Thank you to Nana, Van Papianuela, Anna, Keenan, Will, Jenny, my mom, Mrs. Hall, and Kara. Thank you guys so much for your support. You make this possible. Thank you for listening. You make this possible as well. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. Drop a comment on Spotify, YouTube, email us, whatever you feel like doing. We love to hear from you guys. And until next time, keep on booking it.